Hey everybody, my name's Chris and welcome back to my improvised chainsaw repair shop that's actually an old camper. Well, today we're going to be working on a Homelite Super 2. That's it right there on the bench. I've heard people say that these are a pain to work on, but really they're not that bad. I've worked on a few of these. I actually own one. This particular one was brought to me by a friend of mine to fix for him. They're really not nearly as bad to work on as, say, the little Mini Mac top handle McCullochs. I actually have two of those, and I haven't fixed them just because I don't really want to. But today this video is going to cover disassembly of this saw, take down and cleaning of the carburetor. I've already got the parts to rebuild the carburetor ordered. When they get in, we'll go ahead and rebuild it, reassemble the saw, and I'll show you final tuning and testing. So let's get started. Alright, well, different people may have different ways of attacking this critter, but I'm going to show you the way that I've found is the easiest. I'm going to start on this side, and obviously I've already removed the bar and chain. Usually these have just one 7/16 nut holding the bar on, and then you've got this little plate with a washer on it. Go ahead and take that off too. Alright, so I like to start by taking the muffler off. You might not have to, but it makes it easier, less things to snag on, because you do have to slide the entire engine out of this plastic case. And I'm using a 5/16 nut driver here. Now the next thing you want to do is go ahead and pull your spark plug out. So pull the boot off, and this one takes a 5/8 socket, but I've already loosened it, so we'll just hand screw that out. Okay, next thing, you don't have to take this side handle completely off. If you wanted to, it's one screw up here and one screw down here, but in this case we can just take the top screw out and it will just come off with the recoil cover. And there's 4 screws holding this on. In this case they're 5/16 or slotted screw head. I worked on one the other day that had T25 Torx or slotted screw head, screwdriver head screws. I guess it just depends on what generation of these you have. And that pulls off like so. Now you've got a little plastic flap here. I don't know if you can see it, but it covers the just sort of covers the carburetor and choke area. You can pull that off easy right now. Okay, now before we take anything else off, you'll see this little wire right here, this blue wire that's connected to your kill switch. You have to pull that off. And it goes behind your plug wire here, so just thread it through there and you can just tuck it back out of the way like that. Now there's only 4 more screws holding this entire motor into the case. We'll start with these 2 down here, which are also 5/16. And there's 2 more on top. Now we're almost ready to come out, but we still have a throttle linkage hooked up in here. And there's a little trick to it. You just start sliding the engine out, and if the linkage is installed right, just kind of tilt it the right way and it falls right out. Now I want to show you how the linkage goes. It goes in like this, so that when you have it tilted, it can slide right into the little trigger mechanism piece. So in this orientation is how it goes back in there. You may have noticed the gas tank fell out. That's because I have already disconnected the fuel line. We're gonna have to replace this. I've already had this saw apart for a little bit of cleanup before I made the video, so I'm going ahead and just cut that hardened up fuel line off. We'll replace that, and we'll probably have to replace the hoses coming off the oil tank also. But now you're just ready to slide out and make sure your spark plug boot doesn't hang up. And there's your engine. Now you have complete access to the carburetor. And another thing you may notice is there's no air filter in here. I've already removed that because we're going to be replacing that anyway. The old one will just crumble up in your hand. Alright, now on these there's this little thing in here that you've got to pop out. You would think that this is meant to go on top of the air filter to kind of hold that piece of foam in when it's in there, but every exploded diagram I've been able to find shows this going on the bottom, and the filter element just sticks on top of that, so whatever. Now we can get the carburetor off, and it looks like just 2 5/16 screws for that. This is a Walbro HDA series carburetor, so that's the rebuild kit we ordered for the HDA. Alright, now it may be a little stuck to the intake here. We want to be careful and you know, not break anything, because we do have a little plastic intake manifold there. So I'm just going to give it some light persuasion here. Just tap it, loosen it up. Moving a little bit. We'll probably have to replace the carb to intake gasket after this. Alright, we may actually want to spray some uh-oh. Okay, well, that just little intake and reed valve assembly decided it wanted to come loose first. So there's your little look on that. This piece here is just like a little guard, and then you have a flat reed valve under that. So I think what I'll do here is well, I guess I could rebuild the carburetor with this still stuck on there. That shouldn't really be in the way, although I might try to soak this in some penetrating oil or something and get it to loosen up on that gasket a little bit. Well, I've decided not to push my luck and risk cracking this plastic intake and reed valve assembly by trying to get it off of here. It's stuck pretty good, so at least we know the gasket is still good here. But I'm going to go ahead and crack into this carburetor anyway. This saw was given to a friend of mine by I think his brother-in-law, and I'm just assuming that it's just been put up and sitting for a while. I haven't even checked for spark yet. I can just about 100% guarantee the whole problem with this thing is carburetor and fuel line issues. I'm not even going to put a compression gauge on it because I've already pulled it by hand, and just from experience I know from the feel of it, it's got more than enough compression to run. So we're just going to go ahead and crack into this carburetor. And in my experience, the metering diaphragm is usually what goes bad first, and it can't pumpulate like it's supposed to, and open and close that little needle in there to let the gas in, and that's usually why these stop working after they've been sitting a while. So the metering diaphragm is on the side that has the stamped steel cover like this, and it's usually 4 screws. Sometimes if you get certain models of Zama carburetor, they have just 2 screws. And these usually won't just lift off. You have to give them a little tap. There we go. Actually, that's not bad at all, really. I'm still going to rebuild the carburetor, but yeah, that seems like it would still be usable, although we're probably going to tear it as we get it off of here. Oh yeah. That's okay, we've got a rebuild kit coming. Okay, so what stopped this saw? Has it just been put up and not used, or did it quit running and the guy didn't know what to do? I'm not sure. Definitely wasn't for lack of compression. Carefully work that gasket off. It tore a little bit there. We can just carefully scrape the rest of that gasket off with a razor blade after we get it taken the rest of the way apart. Alright, now we're going to take the metering needle and the little metering lever out. It's always best to start disassembling on the metering side if you can, and be careful because there is a spring under there that'll go flying and you'll lose it. And sometimes the rebuild kits come with a new spring, sometimes they don't. Alright, that's all for this side, so we'll flip it over and get the pump diaphragm side. Sometimes, yeah, those just usually just lift off of there. And I forget what material this type of pump diaphragm is, but they usually hold up a little better, especially like with ethanol fuels, than the rubberized ones. And we'll take the gasket off of the top here, and oh, this is just being a little sweetheart. Normally these don't want to come off, and you gotta very carefully scrape the remnants off without damaging these little, you see those fine little ribs on there. Okay. Well, it looks really clean. Heck, this thing probably would have run fine if I had just put gas in it. That's not how I work though. I always crack into them first. You've got a little screen in here, and that's actually the bottom side of your little metering inlet here. So we'll just get this little hook and just pop that screen out of there. Rebuild kit will come with a new one. And we're almost ready for cleaning, but there's something else we've got to do, and that is take out the low and high adjustment screws. Now I want to see where this carburetor is set at before I take these screws out. So what I'm going to do is screw each one in until it stops and count the turns. So this is the low screw. We go half, 1, and not even 1 1/4 turns. Once it stops, don't try to crank down and tighten on it. You can ruin the whole carburetor that way. Just turn until it stops. Alright, so we were just a little over 1 turn on that one, so we'll take it out. And I like to have, unless you're gonna just remove, clean, and replace these one at a time, sometimes your low and high screws are not identical and it's easy to get them mixed up. So if you're going to remove them both at the same time, just get you a little tray like this and mark a L and a H on a couple of them. That way you know you put your low screw in the L and your high screw in the H, and you're fine. Alright, let's see where we're at on the high. Half, 1, just a hair over 1 turn. Okay. That's probably factory settings, I would assume. Alright, now for cleaning, really this carburetor probably doesn't even need cleaning, but I'm going to squirt some cleaner in there anyway. Basically just make sure your inlet needle hole is clean. Everything in here is clean, all your little holes and ports. Some of these are just blind holes for locating pins. Be careful that you don't get squirted back in the face if you spray in the wrong hole. And of course spray down in your adjustment screw holes. You should see fluid blowing out from, say, this one of these little holes in here, and like for the low side it should be, well, you might not actually see it because the reed valve is on this side, but it should be blowing out inside the venturi of the carburetor. But just make sure you take all that stuff out before you go to squirting cleaning fluid in there, and just give it a good blowing out with compressed air. Clean out your fuel inlet there. I'm just going to do that off camera. I've already told you how to do it, and we'll come back with a clean carburetor and put the rebuild kit in it, throw this thing back together, and see what it does.
Alrighty, well, through the magic of video editing, it is now several days later, and our carburetor kit has finally arrived in the mail. So we're going to tear into that put this back together and go from there. Got our parts laid out. I'm not going to use these little Welch plugs. Most of the time I don't have to pluck those out. If the carburetor really wants to be a booger, we can dig into that, but I don't like to if I don't have to. Alright, so I guess we'll start with the pump diaphragm side. I'm going to take our little screen here, carefully lay it on top of its hole, and then take a punch that's roughly close to the same diameter and poke it down in there. Alright, that's installed. Now, on the pump diaphragm side of the carburetor, now this goes for not just Homelite Super 2s, not just Walbro HDA carburetors, this goes for just about any chainsaw, weed eater, leaf blower, you know, these small carburetors. Okay. You usually have some little locating pins on the cover here, and what you want to do is line that up. You'll notice the gasket goes on the lid first, and then your actual diaphragm. You get it over the locating pins and get it down on there. You'll notice that this means the diaphragm is making contact with the carburetor first. Now that's the opposite on the metering side. We'll get to that in a minute. Oopsie. Alright. Now the metering side of the carburetor. Yeah, our kit did not come with a new spring, so we will be reusing the old one. That's why you don't want to lose that spring when you take it out. And we need to find our screw that holds all that together. I hate when they're slotted head like that. It's so much easier to use my magnetized Phillips. Alright. The tricky part. Get that little spring balanced in there. And I've said before, if you have trouble with that spring staying in place, you can take a small amount of grease or Vaseline, just something petroleum based that will dissolve when gas hits it, and just put a little dab in the bottom there to hold that in place. Okay, we'll get our metering needle dropped in its hole. Hold it down while we carefully start the retaining screw. Don't have to be too tight. I like to give it just a little wiggle to make sure the lever is as far up as it's going to go. And then I take my little Walbro metering lever gauge, and what did I say this was? HDA, yeah, HDA. Now if you look on this gauge, you can see it's got model codes all over it, and that tells you what side of this gauge you use for what carburetor you have. We have the HDA, which means we use this flat side, and what you do is just hold it over there and you check the height of the metering lever. You don't want a gap between the lever and the gauge, and you don't want the gauge to be pressing down on the lever, and that right there appears to be perfect as it is, but we'll check that in a minute. Now, I've seen a lot of people get confused this way. On this side, it's the gasket that goes down first, and then the diaphragm on top of the gasket. Again, you have some locating pins. Get your cover on there. Some people like to pressure test these before you put the cover on. I'm going to do it after I put the cover on and have it somewhat torqued down, just in case the diaphragm's sticking out a little too much or something. It causes us to have a leak, which would cause flooding. Should have been doing this all along, but we're going to put a little bit of air pressure in this carburetor and see if we've got any leak down. And we do. So I'm going to see if could be the needle nut seating. Yeah, we're still leaking. Next thing I suppose we would do would be put a little bit of just soapy water all around and see if we can't track down our leak here. Oh yeah, see, it's coming out all around our gasket here on the pump side. I'll see if I can't tighten that down and get it doing okay. And we'll be back in a few minutes. Alright, well, I went ahead and set the carburetor back on its rightful perch, and actually forgot to show the reinstallation of the carburetor high and low adjusting screws, but that's simple enough. You just screw each one in all the way down and then back it off however many turns it was set at when you took the carburetor apart. Now if you can't remember where it was set, I usually just go 1 full turn to 1 1/4 turns out on each one, and that's usually good enough to at least get it running. You'll have to do some fine-tuning from there. So now I think what we need to do is, yep, it goes this way, put our carburetor bolts back in and get it screwed down. Make sure you do it evenly. Don't just crank down on one side and then the other. You want to go back and forth. Tighten each screw a little bit at a time until you feel like you have the right torque. Alright, and we'll put our little thingamajig that I assume just keeps the foam filter from interfering with the choke butterfly. Alright, now we're going to set that aside for a second and address getting a new fuel line in this tank. I've already drained the gas out of the tank, and one thing you want to make sure of in these tanks is that the vent is still there. That's this little red piece. If you just see a hole in the plastic, then this is missing. This is actually called a duckbill valve. It's probably yay long, sticks down in the tank, and it's flattened out on the end, and what that does is it allows air to be pulled in as a vacuum is created in the tank from fuel being pulled out. That allows air to come in, but they're not supposed to let fuel leak out. I think this one's okay. We're not going to replace it unless it just leaks on us, but I don't think I have any of those in stock. I'd have to order them. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get this old line out, and I'm just going to snip it off as close to the tank as I can, and I can reach it with needle nose. Just reach in and pluck the rest of it out. Let's see. Yep. Should be good enough. Alright, I'm running low on this Tygon type fuel line, but I have a piece that's going to be plenty long enough, and it already has a tapered cut on the end. And if you don't know the reason for that, well, having a tapered cut on one end of your line helps you get it started and thread through the little holes it's got to go through. And what you would do is just make sure you leave enough extra length so that you can cut this off after you've got it where you need it to be, and then you can put your fuel filter on it or hook it to the carburetor, whichever end you're gonna make your cut on. In this case, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put my new fuel filter on the end that is not cut. Can be a little hard to get on. Sometimes you might have to put a dab of oil on there to get it to go. There we go. Now, to get it thread through there, see, I've got to come out this hole right here. I think what I'm going to do is take my yep, that should be good. I'm going to take my curved locking hemostats. These things come in really handy for doing fuel line. Now, I do highly recommend having a few pair of locking hemostats like this for doing fuel lines. They just come in really handy. But another tool that might come in handy for you, if you've ever bought a sort of pre-cut fuel line kit from a big box store, they usually come with fuel line and a couple pieces of fuel line and maybe a primer bulb. They usually come with this little tool, which is nothing more than a piece of wire with a key ring on one side for pulling and a hook on the other end, and that can also help you fish your line through. You would just hook your line much like you would hook a worm on a fishing hook, but already have it through your hole, and then you can just pull your line through that way. I almost never use that tool because I don't know, it might make things easier for me, but I normally just go for the hemostat method. So I'm just gonna, sometimes you got to play with your length here, get it to go. Alright, you see how that's sticking through there. Now I'm gonna grab it on this side with a pair of needle nose, release the hemostat, and pull it through. But before I pull it through too much, I'm gonna stick the filter down in there, and then I will look down in the tank and take up some of the slack, and that looks about right. Now I'm going to leave this long until I get ready to hook it to the carburetor, which that doesn't have to be very long. So new fuel line and filter installed in our tank. Now I might need to address the oil hoses as well. I think one of them was kind of cracked on the end, and I believe there's still some oil in there. I believe one of these has a duckbill valve on the end of it as well, where it's supposed to anyway. I don't see it. It might have fallen down in the oil. So I'm going to see if I've got another duckbill. Before I do any of that, I'm going to take this out to my used oil container and dump the remainder of this bar and chain oil in there. Alright, well, I've removed the old lines from the oil tank now, and I did find that missing duckbill valve. That's this little critter right here. It appears to still be good, so I'm going to reuse it. It had just fallen off of the, or rather probably got blown off of the old line from crankcase pressure when the line started to loosen up. And also for the other hose that sticks all the way down into the tank, this is your little pickup. It sort of looks like a fuel filter, but it's not a fuel filter. It's just a little weighted piece with a screen in it. Don't try to use a fuel filter to suck oil. That's not going to work too good. Okay, if you notice there's a hole here. This is for the line that has the pickup on it. It goes all the way to the bottom of the tank. And then there's a hole up here, which is for your crankcase pulse line that goes into the tank and provides the pressure to force the oil out of the tank. And this is the one that the duckbill goes on, and that only sticks in just a little ways. So I'll assemble that using the same techniques I used with the fuel tank, and then we'll go back to getting this thing together. Alright, are you ready to get this thing back in the case? I'm ready to get it back in the case. Alright, well, the first time I shot this scene, I did it wrong. And this is where it pays to take pictures. If you're one of the millions of people with one of those newfangled cellular telephones that most of them have cameras built into, before you go to taking stuff completely apart, it's always a good idea to take a picture of the way lines are routed and so forth, so that you'll know how they go. I made a mistake here. I originally had this top line goes to your little duckbill valve, and that's what pressurizes the tank. I originally had this line run to this fitting, and the line that has the oil pickup on it, I had it running to this fitting. Well, cranked it up and it was smoking like crazy and oil was dumping out the muffler, so I knew we were sucking bar oil into the crankcase somehow. And just got through watching another guy's YouTube video, and sure enough, I had the lines crossed. Okay, so now let's do it the right way. This fitting goes to your duckbill. This one goes to your oil pickup tube that runs to the bottom of the tank. Let's try this again. Reassembly can be slightly tricky because, as you can see, these tanks just kind of want to flop around. There's no screws or anything that hold these in place. They just get held in place when they're inserted into the case, and it just kind of squeezes everything together. Oh, by the way, I've already installed a new air filter. It's just a little piece of foam that's cut out in this shape. This is an actual Homelite part, I don't remember the model number, but if you just go to eBay and type in Homelite Super 2 air filter, you should see what you need. That's where I got that one. Alright, now the trick here is to, okay, you want to go ahead and put your throttle linkage on first. I almost forgot about that. And just kind of lay that to the side, because I'm going to show you how you can reinstall the throttle linkage without having to take this part of the handle off and have all your little trigger springs and everything go flying. Some people like to do it that way, but I have figured out that you don't have to take all this apart. Alright, now this is where I find having the muffler off helps with reassembly. You don't have to do it. I've watched other videos where people left the muffler on through the whole process. I just think it's a little bit easier because it gives you room to reach in and make sure your spark plug wire does not get snagged. Alright, so kind of angle stuff in, and like I said, you're going to have to pretty much watch your plug wire the whole way going in, and don't go too far in yet, because you're going to have to hook up that throttle linkage. And I'll lower you down here and try to give a little bit better view of that process. Now, if you can see this right here, it's a little piece of plastic with a hole in it. This is where your throttle linkage hooks to. Oh look, magnetized screwdriver. Hello. What we're going to do is try to get this end started, and you may have to kind of move that a little bit. So we're not quite close enough yet to make contact. So I'll slide in just a little more, and once you can get in that little hole, work it just a little bit like that, and it pops right in. Sometimes on reassembly I hit a little bit of a snag and the screw holes won't line up, but in this case I think we turned out pretty good. So we will go ahead and stick in our top screws that hold the engine into the crankcase, or not crankcase, the body of the saw, I guess you could say. Okay, now don't forget your kill wire, which goes behind the plug wire and hooks to this little spade connector down here. Get on there. See no reason now why we couldn't go ahead and put the starter cover and handle on. Oh, before I do that, I think it'll be easier to put this little cover in, which goes right here. I think this can be put in and removed with the starter cover on, but it's just easier to do it now. Come on now, get in there. Like a good little starter cover. Alright. Okay. We'll just start our screws. And again, in this case, these are 5/16 hex head or slotted for a flathead screwdriver. Yours may vary. Now we can just stick our muffler back on and our spark plug. Get a chain sharpened up. And we'll see what it does. I'm going to go ahead and put the muffler on here. Once again, 5/16. And our spark plug takes a 5/8 socket. There we go. Our linkage works okay. Nothing is binding.
And we're back. I apologize, but I apparently have lost the original take 2 of the testing footage where I explained how I was adjusting the carburetor and all that. I went back to the camera and looked, and it had only recorded 2 seconds from the time I hit record, so I don't know what went on there. So I just went back right quick and filmed a quick couple of cuts with the thing after I had already got it adjusted. But let me try to explain a little bit of what I did. When I started, it was running way too rich, and your high adjustment screw is the, wait a minute, nope, I've got that backwards. Your high is the top screw here. It's always the furthest away from the engine. Your low is the one that's always closest to where the carburetor mounts to the engine. Now the low controls your mixture at idle and your throttle response. Okay, if you don't have this opened up enough, it might not want to run at all, or when you go to give it some throttle, it'll just want to bog and not pick up. If you're bogging like that, you would turn it counterclockwise a little bit until your throttle response picks up, but not so far that it actually floods itself out while idling and dies on you. There's a happy medium between too much, too little, and just right. And on your high side, that controls your mixture at wide open throttle, and some people like to set it with digital tachometers. I like to go by ear. There's a certain sound you'll hear. It's called four-stroking. Basically, if you rev this thing up and it's just whee, you know, and it doesn't have any torque in the cut, you're too lean and you don't want to cut like that because you will burn your engine up. What you want to hear is sort of almost a lower growl coming from it just when you're out of the cut. It should smooth out once you start cutting. If it's doing that four-stroke growl or burble, as some people call it, while you're cutting, then you're too rich. It should smooth out once you're in the cut. And over here, this I don't know if you can see it, but you've also got a idle adjustment screw that simply there's a wedge on the end of the screw, and it simply holds your throttle butterfly open just a little bit. Oh, and if you notice the electrical tape here on the handle, it actually had tape on the handle when I received the thing, and I wasn't sure why, but I found out earlier when my trigger stopped working. There was enough flex in this handle to where this black top, sometimes depending on how you hold it, could flex up enough that the trigger could actually come up out of its seat there. And yeah, so I figure if it already had the tape on it, it's fine to just put it back on there. Alright, well, until next time, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.